PlayStation under Jim Ryan can be summed up in a few key phrases: live service, PC ports, profit, and mismanagement. Soon-to-be former president of PlayStation, Jim Ryan shepherded the brand into a new direction that saw them release types of products that were foreign to the gaming giant: PC ports and live service games. To support this, Mr. Ryan made many purchases with the intent of facilitating this, with the major acquisitions being Firesprite, Haven, and Bungie, with the sole reason behind the $3.6 billion purchase of Bungie in 2022 being to acquire the knowledge on how to create a successful live service game. A large part of this cost was attributed to incentives to maintain the talent that work at Bungie, with Bungie having kicked off the trend of live service games as we know them in September 2014 with the release of Destiny. Live service games existed prior to Destiny, but mainly on PC, in the form of MMOs. Multiplayer games would release in the console space, and it was expected that they would slowly bleed players until the next release. In the aftermath of Destiny, live service games began to crop up more consistently throughout the 8th generation of consoles. Rainbow Six Siege, Overwatch, Tom Clancy's The Division, Rocket League, and Fortnite, to name a few of the more successful ones. But for every successful live service game, there is just as many that did not succeed, like 2019's proposed Destiny killer Anthem, Marvel's Avengers, and Battleborn. When you purchase a multiplayer game now, it is expected that at launch the game will be incomplete, missing core features and game modes that will eventually be added through future updates. The live service genre of game is very populated and competitive, with each aiming to have players continually return, which requires a large amount of content and is very expensive to accomplish. Now, we are at a point where the genre is very saturated. Entering into the space now is very difficult because players have chosen their comfort games. The PlayStation brand under Jim Ryan made the major bet of entering this space, and it seems as though the initiative has gone massively wrong internally. The Last of Us Factions multiplayer was intended to release with The Last of Us Part 2, but was spun off and would become its own game. Naughty Dog is arguably the crown jewel studio in the PlayStation family. They make games that are loved by many and draw massive critical acclaim. Bungie was brought in to provide feedback on The Last of Us Factions. Jason Schreier stated in his Bloomberg expose, Bungie raised questions about The Last of Us multiplayer project's ability to keep players engaged for a long period of time, which led to the reassessment. In the aftermath of this reassessment, the team was scaled back, with layoffs occurring at Naughty Dog, particularly in quality assurance, as the roles would no longer be required or the project was reevaluated. We know as of November 4th, 2023 that the game was still in development because of a tweet from the game's creative director. This is a game that we were meant to see this year, as Neil Druckmann himself said we would hear more about the project this year. I don't believe he meant it in the current context of what we've heard. This is my own pure speculation, but based upon Jason Schreier's reporting, it seems like The Last of Us Factions would have been the perfect game to release in the time of the PS3, where multiplayer games were allowed to die. It was expected that they would release their content, people would play the game and then move on to the next game when they felt they'd had their fun. The Last of Us Factions is a title I am very much looking forward to, no matter what form it may eventually take when it does release. We've seen so many examples of teams that excel at making single-player games struggling with the pivot towards a live service game. For every example that did it successfully, there is many more where it effectively hurt the team that was developing it, like BioWare. Update: while creating this video, new information has come to light. On the 14th of December 2023, Naughty Dog released a public update on The Last of Us Factions, where it was stated, "We realize many of you have been anticipating news around the project that we've been calling The Last of Us Online. There's no easy way to say this. We've made the incredibly difficult decision to stop development of the game. The key reason that was cited for cancelling the project was that Naughty Dog had come to the conclusion that the ambitious nature of The Last of Us Online would require the resources of the entire studio to support the game, which would hinder efforts to create the single-player stories that they are known and celebrated for. As a result, the decision was made to cancel the project in favour of the single-player games. While I am disappointed that this was cancelled, I am more relieved that Naughty Dog realized just how much work would have to go into making a live service game, and made the necessary adjustments before it damaged the studio and its reputation. I can imagine morale at the studio is currently low as a result of the cancellation of this project. Many studios that pivot from single player to live services do not make the transition without hurting the team. In this instance, I'm glad to say it won't be the case. However, how do you make a game for 5 years and not come to the conclusion that you will need to support it? That's the most absurd part of this to me. A lot of the community for The Last of Us factions would have been happy with something similar to how the mode worked in the original game, instead of something that was arbitrarily scaled up to be more than likely a $70 release. Something in the vein of the original version could have been dropped for $30 USD, and then that could have been it. From the outside, to say the project appears to have been mismanaged would be putting it lightly. It seems that in light of the current financial situation, PlayStation Studios have begun tightening their belt, with layoffs occurring at many of the studios under their umbrella, such as Insomniac, the visual arts studio in San Diego, Media Molecule. In addition to this, there was a game by Deviation Games, where PlayStation had established a partnership for the development of the game. This partnership was announced on June 10th, 2021. We don't have many concrete details on what the game really was that was in development, outside of it being a new IP and a multiplayer game, presumably one of the 10 live service titles that Jim Ryan mentioned. As of May 13th, 2023, Deviation Games suffered heavy layoffs, with around 90 developers being let go and the current status of the multiplayer PlayStation project being unconfirmed. However, Colin Moriarty of Sacred Symbols would later state that he had heard the game had been cancelled.
It's a similar thing. Someone reached out to me and was like, Deviation Games is laying off 90 people and canceling the game they're working on. And this person had it on good authority. And I'm like, I just can't vet this. I don't know how to vet this.
This would go a long way to explain why we know very little about what is coming in the future from PlayStation. They're cleaning house, reevaluating projects, and regressing the massive gamble they may have made. A gamble that, if not carried out correctly, could damage the reputation that the brand has built up since the late PS3. Where if you see a game being published by PlayStation, you know there is a very good chance the game will, at best, be some of the greatest games on the console, and at worst, good. With Jim Ryan having announced his departure slated for March 2024, seemingly in a hurry, we can only assume his gambit into the live service space has not paid off as well internally as intended. When a CEO departs, normally someone is in line to take over the position. The fact that there will be an interim CEO of SIE says to me that Jim Ryan was pushed out. When Sony purchased Bungie, they did so with the intent that they could utilize the knowledge of the studio to cultivate several live service games, which could potentially be successful and generate absurd amounts of money for the publisher. Things at the time were going great for Bungie. The Destiny community were content in the aftermath of the release of The Witch Queen, but the community would find themselves becoming more and more dissatisfied with the game, with this coming to a culmination after the release of Lightfall, the expansion which many now view as a stopgap expansion meant to fill time before the final shape. Thanks to a report from IGN, we have details about conditions that were placed upon Bungie's continued independence by Sony. As long as the company would hit key metrics that were agreed upon at the time of sale, the leadership team at Bungie were able to retain control of the company. Should they fail to meet these metrics, the board could be dissolved with Sony taking full control of Bungie, potentially folding them into PlayStation Studios proper, as opposed to them currently being two separate entities under one company, as they are currently. The sentiment around Lightfall was the final straw. As a result of brewing frustration within the Destiny community, where the community felt exploited, Bungie would miss their revenue projections by approximately 45%. In response to this, the leadership of Bungie decided to lay off around 100 people at the end of October. It was Bungie leadership who made the choice to lay off those people, not Sony, with the environment of the studio post-layoff being described as soul-crushing, with there being no promise that future layoffs won't occur. If the final shape does not perform, Bungie is in for a world of hurt. Destiny 2 more than likely will face a drop-off after the final shape, as the story that many have followed for close to 10 years finally comes to a conclusion. Based on reporting of the situation and how it has been handled, it seems that Bungie is indeed in need of saving, with the leadership needing to be replaced to properly right the ship. Bungie is a company that was always viewed with a degree of prestige. Now, in the aftermath of what has occurred, I would not be surprised if many of the staff that are currently still there are eyeing the door, awaiting their time to exit. November 30th, 2023 would see Bungie reignite the ire of their community with the release of the Starter Pack, a package that would contain a few exotics and resources which could be used in the game. The idea was that this pack would be purchased by newcomers to the game as a sort of jumpstart, but none of the items included were actually worth the money. As a result, very shortly after, this would be removed from sale. This whole Bungie acquisition by PlayStation now comes off as incompetent. They purchased a team that was successful at making live service games to learn how to make them, only for that team's live service to become so mismanaged that it fell short, now potentially resulting in people who don't know how to make that type of game coming on board to possibly right the ship. PlayStation purchased Bungie because they felt they needed saving. Now Bungie is the one who needs saving. One factor that I also think needs to be considered as to why revenue may be down 45% outside of the obvious factors to do with the game itself. 2023 has been an amazing year for games, seeing the return of Prime Fortnite, Game of the Year winner Baldur's Gate 3, The Legend of Zelda, Tears of the Kingdom, Alan Wake 2, and many more. There's just more must-play games this year. If you aren't enjoying a game, you aren't going to stick with it when there are other things you could play instead. Ultimately, Bungie was purchased with the intent of gaining knowledge on producing successful live service games. They mismanaged their own live service game to a point where if they had been independent, the studio would have potentially imploded. Sony had no idea what they were looking at when they purchased Bungie, and now their live service initiative is not working out as they had intended. I would like to thank you for watching the video. If you have watched this far, it's been a good first year on YouTube. I appreciate every single one of my viewers and subscribers, and would like to thank you for your support from the bottom of my heart. If you are new here and enjoyed the video, be sure to like and subscribe. I'll see you for the next video.